Hello everyone, I'm Bruffy1322 and this video is going to show the fastest fully upgraded vehicles from the GTA Online Mercenaries DLC, showing both lap time, top speed and relative position in class, all while being shown in order of lap time. For all the information you need about this series, check the playlist linked in the second line of the description, and feel free to check out my Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get testing results of any new cars a little bit early. So the Mercenaries DLC, this is probably going to go down in history as one of the worst DLCs the game has ever seen, obviously actively removing content in the form of the ability to buy hundreds of older popular cars and bikes just gone. It also gave us some pretty forgettable vehicles as well, but it gave us some fun stuff also, you know, for example the F-160 Raiju, which took the top spot in both lap time and top speed for any vehicle in the game, let alone just the planes class. So, you know, it's a mixed bag this one. We're focusing on the vehicles today, but obviously the DLC as a whole wasn't anything special, and I think, honestly, I would have rather not had it at all, the way that they removed all those vehicles. But when we're talking about the vehicles, in 14th place for the DLC, when we're talking about land vehicles, is the Inductor, obviously. The first ever DLC for the Cycles class, but it couldn't match the race bike for the top spot, both for lap time or for top speed. Even though it was, you know, the first ever DLC bike in terms of Cycles, and the first ever, you know, Cycles had never had a DLC vehicle before, it didn't do enough to usurp the race bike and the old classic for the top spots for lap time and top speed. Speaking of something that didn't get anywhere close to the top spot, the Clique Wagon. Not only was it 64th place in the muscle class for lap time, it had the worst top speed for any muscle car, any muscle class vehicle in the game. Yeah, it's 74th out of 74 muscle cars when it comes to top speed. That's what we got with the Clique Wagon, and the story isn't much better really with our next vehicle in 12th place of the Brigham, the last vehicle to be released. And considering how long this drip feed was and there was only about 5 vehicles, it's kind of crazy that, you know, it took so long for this drip feed. But obviously we basically got one vehicle a month just to tie in with the GTA Plus, you know, giving the free car with that. So that's just how it is these days with GTA Online and the updates. But the Brigham wasn't that much better. It was obviously a good few seconds and a few mile per hour quicker than the Clique Wagon, but certainly nothing to write home about and nowhere near the top half of the muscle class. Then we got a few, I would say, relatively decent and somewhat interesting off-road vehicles. The Walton L35 first up here in 11th place. Not that interesting from a performance perspective. It's, you know, outside of the top 10, fairly bog standard top speed and lap time for off-road vehicles, but it did have some interesting modifications with it, which, you know, made it feel a little bit unique. Whether it's worth the kind of prices that you're paying for these cars anymore, who knows, but I certainly don't think so. Then we have the Hot Ring Hellfire, only just ahead of the Walton, only just making it into the top 10 for the DLC as a whole. Obviously with its, you know, ridiculous mechanic that you have to be on the brakes to increase the traction with those flaps that pop up on the top. So yeah, it's a weird you know, way to drive this car. 106.2 lap time, it's pretty average, but obviously, you know, only good enough for 75th place in the sports class. 22nd in sports for top speed though isn't as bad. And then we come back to an off-road car with the Monstrosity. Obviously this is without, you know, not in its HSW form. I know the Monstrosity is quicker than the Hot Ring Hellfire. That just goes to show how these things can be. Good enough for, you know, just outside of the top 5 in the off-road class, which is obviously a much smaller class than sports. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about the Monstrosity because we're going to be seeing it again later on in the video. Speaking of things that we're going to see twice in the video, the Buffalo EVX is up next, and again, in its standard form, it's a pretty, you know, reasonable average muscle car for what you would expect from the pace of a muscle car these days. A 106.1, it's basically on the same sort of pace as the Hot Ring Hellfire from the sports class, the Monstrosity for off-roads. It's a pretty, you know, bog standard, what we always would call a bog standard sports car lap time. Not that great of a top speed, it's okay, but nothing special, obviously because it is an electric vehicle. And then another off-roader, again, somewhat interesting with the Ratel, but in a way it was just a slightly quicker trophy truck, which it was kind of not that interesting, you know. I think it was a relatively forgettable vehicle, and I don't think it handled quite as nicely as the trophy truck, even though they were very similar. But, you know, top 5 is always possible for the Ratel, even though it's 7th place for the DLC. It is in 5th place for the off-roads class for lap time and top speed, so very consistent there. And then the Italy GTO Stinger TT is up next in 6th place. Possibly will also go down in history as having one of the worst names of any vehicle in the game. A 102.8 is good enough for 22nd in sports these days. You know, back in a few years ago, that would have been good enough for the top spot, but the game has moved on now. 132 mile per hour for a top speed is very good for a non-HSW car, not quite as, you know, quick as the Pariah, but it's still a very respectable top speed there. And now we come into the HSW vehicles and then that aspect of things, because in 5th place, the top 5, we've got the HSW version of the Buffalo EVX, gets a significant improvement in lap time, a huge improvement in top speed, but it's second for life for the Buffalo EVX in the muscle class. It couldn't do what it needed to do to beat the Vigero ZX HSW at the top of the class. It gave it a good run for its money, and certain tracks will suit it more than others, but ultimately the Vigero ZX, even though it's more difficult to drive, it is what you want. Interestingly though, we do have a non-HSW car mixing it in with the HSWs, with the La Carouse, and this goes to show just how quick the HSW version of this car is, considering the regular version gets a 1 minute lap time, good enough for 7th in sports, but huge discrepancy in terms of top speed. You know, 7th in sports for lap time, but 82nd in sports for top speed. That might be one of the biggest gaps we've ever seen, but a very respectable lap time that, and very good vehicle in general for the sports class. Then we got the HSW Monstrosity in 3rd place. Kind of amazing that this has, you know, taken the top spot in off-roads, because it is so much quicker than everything else in the class. First for off-roads, for lap time and top speed, it completely demolished the class, and basically you have to have this car if HSW is turned on for any kind of off-road races. We'll talk about that in a second as well though, because in 2nd place we've got the classic bait and switch that Rockstar have done many times in the past. This is exactly what they did for this DLC as well, if the DLC wasn't bad enough already. The Italy GTO Stinger TT HSW was the first one to be released, and it took the top spot for the sports class for both lap time and top speed. A ridiculous top speed of 168.5 miles per hour. That makes it the fastest land vehicle in the game in terms of top speed, beating any kind of bike or anything like that. But then the La Carouse came along not too long later, after people had spent their $4 million on the Italy GTO Stinger TT already, and the La Carouse demolished it by 3 seconds per lap to be the number 1 fastest sports car in the game. Obviously this is the HSW version of the La Carouse. Its top speed is still respectable at 142, but with it being an electric vehicle, it's not, you know, quite up there in terms of top speed. But ultimately when you're doing a race, top speed doesn't matter anywhere near as much as everything else, and its lap time is just astonishing. You know, the La Carouse HSW is the 4th quickest car in the entire game for lap time. Only 2 supercars with the HSW Weaponized Ignis and the HSW Cyclone 2, and 1 open wheel car with the BR8 can beat this car for lap time, and you can see the complete difference between the two vehicles. And obviously the classic bait and switch where Rockstar released the Stinger TT first, make you spend your money, and then release something quicker a few weeks later. Going back to the Monstrosity HSW as well, if a race is locked to off-road vehicles, you can't stop the HSW Monstrosity being used. Under normal circumstances, you can turn off HSW in the race lobby, so you know, cars that have HSW will just become their normal versions, but you can't do that for off-road, because the Monstrosity was the very first HSW car for the off-roads class, and Rockstar forgot to add the HSW option in the race lobby for that. So yeah, you can remove HSW from off-roads if other classes are available. You sort of go to motorcycles, turn off HSW, then go back to off-roads. But if off-roads is the only class that's available for the race, you just can't stop HSW vehicles being used, and obviously the Monstrosity just demolishes everything in the class, as we see from the previous best in terms of top speed of the Vagrant, and it demolishes everything for lap time as well. So yeah, I think that, alongside a few other basic mistakes in vehicles this time around with this DLC, like Imani tech upgrades not being fully finished on some cars, and having certain mods like armor plating being attributed to other mods like the interior with the Monstrosity, I think all of that showed that there was a distinct lack of care and attention to this DLC. it goes as no surprise, and yeah, with them removing all those vehicles as well, I think probably Mercenaries has to be the worst DLC of all time for GTA. But they're all the vehicles that came from the Mercenaries DLC, all ranked in terms of lap time. Those are all their lap times and top speeds. Hopefully this is helpful to collect everything together and remind you of what we had if you'd forgotten half of the stuff, and to keep you up to date on, you know, what things that you need to be competitive these days. So that's pretty much it for this one. Consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want testing results early. And remember to read the description for more info, comment with your thoughts, like the video if you enjoyed it, found it helpful, and subscribe for more. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.